Okay, let's wrap up the lower extremity and talk about the ankle and foot, okay? That way we'll get finished with that, then we'll start on the axial scale, then we'll talk about something like the skull, which is really sort of crazy, okay? Let's first of all talk about the ankle joint. The ankle joint we know is called the talocrural joint, okay? Talocrural joint, because again, we involve the talus, which is this bone right here, and crural means leg. Remember we talked about crural? Crural was a word that we had earlier in the semester, okay? When we talked about regional names. It's called a talocrural joint, okay? And what it really is, it's the tibiofibular articulation with the talus. So this would be my tibia. So if I'm looking at here, here's the tibia, as we should all already know. Here's the fibula, and this right here is called the talus, T-A-L-U-S. Talus, okay? And that's the joint that we have. Now, one of the things that we talked about this before when we talked about the distal tibia is this is called a mortise joint. It's called a mortise joint, okay? And what I mean by mortise joint is the joint's an upside down U, okay, which is actually a relatively stable type of a joint. So if I'm looking at this point of view, I have a strut coming down this way, I have a strut coming this way, so I really don't get much motion in the talus this way, I don't get much motion in the talus this way. Now if I look from the, this would be a frontal plane view, as everybody should probably know already. If I look from the lateral side on a sagittal plane, the tibia will be like this, the tibial plafond will be like this, and the talus sits inside like that. Well, what that does is that means that since it's round, I can't go side to side from, when we talk about on that sagittal plane. But what happens is what I could do, I could actually rotate this way. So basically what the ankle joint does, because of this mortise joint, which is again a very stable joint, provides motion in basically one direction, okay? I can't say totally because there is a little bit of motion. That should be an E, by the way, direction. There is a little motion on a frontal plane, but not a whole lot. It's almost negligible. Basically, all this motion is occurring on a sagittal plane, and that sagittal plane motion that we have is called dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. So the foot comes up, the foot goes down. We can move it a little bit to side, but not a whole lot, and that's because of my medial malleolus and my lateral malleolus over here, okay? Now this is we showed this before, the same type of a view that we've had this image on the previous on the previous discussion, and this is my medial malleolus down here. Here would be the tibial plafond. That's a tibial plafond. I'm gonna use white. That's probably better. It's a tibial plafond. Plefond, plafond, okay? And if you look, it's sort of rounded on the inside. If you looked from side to side, again, this is looking from the front. You see this, upside down U shape. That's that mortise joint. Fibula would be sitting right out here like this, okay? And I actually be overlapping the tibia right here a little bit more. I didn't overlap it nearly enough, but that just shows what we see from on that frontal plane view, okay? This is a 3D CT, which shows what we're talking about. So here's the tibia, okay, here's the tibia, here's the fibula right here, here's the tibia, here's the fibula, okay, here's the medial malleolus, here's the lateral malleolus, and what we actually have inside there is that upside down U, or that mortise joint. We can see it right here. Here's the talus, T-A-L-U-S, is going to be this bone right here. Okay, it's sitting inside the ankle. We'll talk a little bit more about later on. This area right here would be that area, that tibiofibular ligament. Okay, that anterior, it's called actually its total name would be anterior inferior tibiofibular, because fibular ligament, because there's one proximal, so it's superior, the other one, but this is anterior because it's in the front, inferior because it's at the bottom of the tibia and the fibula, tibiofibular ligament because it goes from the tibia to the fibula, okay? And that's when we talked about previously with the high ankle sprain. But this just shows that mortise arrangement that we see, in regards to the ankle, which means that what happens is for the talus to go this way, it's being blocked by the fibula. For the talus to go this way, it's being blocked by the tibia with the medial malleolus. I don't know if anybody had remembered watching Cavs opening night a couple years ago against the Celtics. With the fracture dislocation of the ankle, and basically the bone had broken here, and when we looked, the talus was actually sitting out here sideways. Okay, if you looked at all the pictures, it was actually a pretty neat thing. I remember I was at the game. I'm sitting at the far end of the arena in the upper bowl, And I saw him go down because it was early in the, I was in the first quarter, Haywood, okay? I saw him go down, and the big screen went off, so you couldn't see anything that's going on. So immediately I called home. I called my wife. I said, "Hey, if you have any pictures on the TV, send them to me." So what happened was before they were able to shut the TV off, they did show his foot coming out at an angle, sideways, okay? And so basically I was able to get that on my, she sent me a picture on my phone. So I'm up telling everybody in the stands where I was at, what happened. He had a fracture dislocation. And basically he broke right through this, which meant now that the tailless here can move this way, free to move around the cabin. It actually came out so the foot was hanging sideways like that. Go back and look at the pictures. You'll really enjoy them, okay? And it's after you throw up in a bucket. So make sure you have a bucket next to you if you want to watch those if you have a weak stomach. But anyway, that's what we're talking about in regards to all these, you know, the structure, this mortise structure of the ankle. It's relatively stable and does prevent a lot of that. Again, if I do injure that anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament, that allows the fibula to move this way, which means the tailless is able to move that way, and the ankle becomes very unstable. Okay, and actually, if it's not taken care of, it'll destroy the surface of the tailless and create significant ankle instability and disability because of that. A lot of times what they'll do is if they do rupture that ligament, if that ligament is ruptured here, what they may do is they actually take a drill and run a drill. Let me just do it with a different color. They'll run a drill hole up this way and they put in a wire. Okay, actually it's the angle is a little bit wrong. Okay, they could actually take, so let me draw that ligament in. The ligament's like here. What they could do is they actually drill it more like this, across this way, a little bit higher maybe, and then they pass a wire through like a tightrope, and then they put a button here, so it can't go anywhere, and they put a button here, and that wire, it allows a little bit of give, but not a whole lot, and it sort of holds things together, and it allows that ligament to heal a little bit better. It's called tightrope. Okay. And this is just looking at some of the ligamentous structure around the ankle. Okay, and I know we didn't talk a lot about the knee. I probably will throw something in sooner or later. I got a whole presentation on that. Didn't want to spend all that time. But the ones that we think that they're the most important, let's look at the ones down here. Okay, let's look at the ones on the bottom. Okay, this one right here is called the anterior talofibular ligament because it goes from the fibula. Here's the fibula right here. Okay, it goes from the fibula to the neck region of the talus, which is right here. That's probably the first ankle ligament that usually goes. When your foot goes in underneath you, that's the ligament that gets ruptured. This one right here is on the lateral side of the ankle, which is called the calcaneal fibular ligament. It runs from the fibula to the side of the calcaneus, which is the heel bone. Okay, then this third one on the lateral side is this posterior talofibular ligament that's there. Okay, when we talked about that anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament, we see that right here, running from the fibula to the tibia. Okay, now this is on the medial side. Okay, and this is on the medial side, and this is called this whole complex. And, you know, it has a couple ligaments here. There's actually 4 or 5 that are all blended together, and they all look at these together. It's called the deltoid ligament. Deltoid ligament. Okay, and they call it the deltoid because delta in a Greek letter is like a triangle, and this actually creates a triangular arrangement of these ligaments, so they call it the deltoid ligament. Some of them are very superficial, some of them actually almost run horizontally to go from side to side. Okay, but anyway, that's the major portion. If we look up here at the top, you know, you see the anterior inferior tibiofibular ligament here. This is looking from the front of the ankle. This is looking from the back of the ankle. Okay, back, front. Okay, and here's that anterior talofibular ligament right here. Which is this one right here. Okay, and this is the calcaneal fibular ligament, which is this one right there. Maybe I'll draw it in a different color. That's that. That's that. We can't see the posterior. Here's the posterior talofibular ligament, which is right there. Okay, and now we're seeing this is the deltoid ligament right there, and you see these are the superficial fibers. These are the deep fibers. Okay, I remember I had a patient who was a hockey coach. Okay, and we were at a hockey banquet. Okay, high school hockey banquet, and I had worked with the team. I was the team doc, and he was one of the coaches. And he had all kinds of problems with his ankle. He was a goalie years and years ago, but he had sprained his ankle by stepping in a sewer grate by mistake. It was slippery. It was raining in the parking lot where his office is, and his foot got trapped in one of those grates and twisted his ankle, twisted it outward, and basically he had ruptured this whole area, the deep fibers deltoid ligaments, and had all kinds of tremendous pain. Okay, with that, we got an MRI and showed us that, and he eventually went eventually over about a year to go on to heal, but that's what the problem was. Okay, this is just another view looking at that ankle, that mortise of the ankle. We can see how that upside down U. Better do it this way, upside down U. How that this right here is the tailless. Tailless. Obviously, there's the tibia. This is the fibula. Okay, we see those things, and that's what we see. That's that ankle, that mortise. This is the body of the talus. This area in here. There's also a head and neck, and we'll show that out here in a little bit. Here's the lateral malleolus, lateral malleolus. Here's the medial malleolus on this side. Okay, so those are the things you probably should be able to recognize from this X-ray. This is a lateral view. Okay, this is looking at what we see. Okay, and here's the ankle joint right here. Now you can see the fibula again with superimposition here. That word again, superimposition. Here's the fibula. It's coming down just like this, and you can see that. I'll remove that. You can actually, and you'll be able to see where that is. Okay, I'll remove that, and then what happens is here's the tibia sitting like this, and then here's the talus. The talus is sitting inside the ankle joint, just like this. And this would be the body of the talus. Let me do that. Body. This right here is the head, and this would be the neck, okay, of the talus. It has a crazy blood supply too. People, when they have an injury to the talus, some of these go unnoticed. I remember I was years ago before I went back to school as a trainer, and I was working in Wisconsin at a college game. And turns out that we had a defensive back who he was backpedaling and had tremendous ankle pain. He jammed his ankle, and we sent him to the hospital. And the hospital, for an X-ray. We took him out of the game because he could barely walk. Turned out that the X-ray turned out to be negative. Couldn't see anything. But we were really suspicious because of his level of pain. We kept him in the cast. 2 weeks later, he came back, and what we actually saw 2 weeks later, when we took him out of the cast and got another X-ray, what happens is we could actually see the fracture line that went right straight through the body of the talus. Luckily, we put him in a cast and we started to treat him as if it was a fracture early enough. Other than that, this part of the bone would die. Okay, they get that avascular necrosis. What do we see? The bone would be very white. Okay, so anyway, but let's see what we see here. Okay, so anyway, here's the tibia, there's the fibula. So if we look at the bones here, here's the fibula, there's the tibia, and you can see that that superimposition in this area. Here's the talus. This area, this bone right here is called the calcaneus. That's the heel bone. Okay, it's called the calcaneus. Exceptionally significant bone. There's a joint right here. It's called the talocrural or subtalar joint, and there's another part of that. It's in there. That joint could be a real bad problem. We won't get into it, but it could be a real bad problem. When people get arthritis in this joint, it's tremendously bad. This bone right here is called the navicular. Hard to tell. This joint bone right here is called the cuboid. I'll show you. It'll be easier to see them from a different point of view, but that's the bones that we're going to be start to look a little bit more. Okay. Now, what do we know about this one? Well, obviously it's a kid. There's a growth plate and there's a growth plate. Hopefully that we're seeing enough growth plates now that we know the difference. Here's the talus in here. Here's the fibula. Here's the tibia. Piece of cake. Okay. So those things you should be able to identify. I'll move this out of the way so you could actually look at that again. Ready? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Here we go. I'm going to go to the next one. Now this is again looking at the lateral view. Now foot's a little bit plantar flexed, means it's going downwards. Okay. And what happens is when we looked at that earlier view, this part of the talus right here was sitting inside that ankle joint. What happens is now with the foot being plantar flexed, the whole talus rotates this way, okay, inside that ankle joint, and now the back side of the talus is making contact with the distal portion of the tibia. Here's the calcaneus in here. Here's the navicular. We'll talk about that in a minute, okay? Now, let's talk about the tarsal bones. We've already talked about the talus a lot, but we haven't talked about too many other things. We have what's called the greater tarsus or the greater tarsal. Okay, and that's involving two bones, the talus and the calcaneus. So here's the calcaneus right here. This is the talus. Okay, talus sits inside that ankle joint. Calcaneus sits below. And again, we talked about this a minute ago. This right here is called the subtalar joint. It sits right in there. and right in there, or the talocalcaneal joint, okay, which is a significant joint, okay. I could spend probably about 4 hours just talking about that joint itself, okay. But that's what we see. Here's the talus sitting right here, and below that, underneath it, is the calcaneus. This is superior here, this is inferior here, okay? And that's what we see there, okay? That's called the greater tarsus, which is the talus and the calcaneus. You should know that, okay? What happens, we also have what's called the lesser tarsus. Now, the greater remember carpal bones had 8, we have 7 tarsal bones, okay? The lesser tarsus is distal to the talus and the calcaneus, okay? And we have, this is going to be easy to remember, okay? We have the navicular, because remember the navicular in the wrist? This bone right here is a navicular. This bone right here is the navicular, okay? It sits, if you look at the talus, okay? The talus, the head is right there. The head of the talus is right there, okay? Head of the talus is right there. And the navicular, where the head of the talus is round, because a head is round, the navicular is concave at that point, okay? And so what happens is the navicular sits right on top of the talus. There's a navicular, there's a navicular. There's the navicular right there, there's the navicular. You see how it makes contact with the talar head right there. That's called the navicular. Exceptionally important bone. When you look at basketball players, you ever see they have a fractured navicular, you know, and you get these guys that are 7 feet tall, and their feet aren't made to support something that's that big. That navicular, what's called the keystone of the arch. The arch comes up this way, and the keystone is like right where the arch has all that pressure, and the talus pushes this way, and all the other rest of the foot pushes this way and squishes the navicular between, which causes what's called a navicular stress fracture. Navicular stress fractures can be absolutely devastating, okay? Zydrunas Ilgauskas had navicular stress fractures, which stopped his career. Yao Ming had navicular stress fractures. You know, all these big players, they have navicular stress fractures. And what happens is that bone has a bad blood supply to allow it to heal. I had a patient who was she was the at that time the Plain Dealer was the newspaper, was the girls track star of the year. She was a patient of mine, and she had a problem with her hip, what was called a snapping hip, and I took care of that. She was an outstanding runner. Anyway, she got a full scholarship to Villanova. Went to Villanova, and I had made some orthotics and all kinds of stuff for her to go inside her running shoes and stuff. Well, when I got to Villanova, the trainer there thought he knew a little bit more, took him out of there, and lo and behold, guess what? She developed a navicular stress fracture. She never ran the same after that. It was absolutely nasty, okay? And she developed something called a reflex sympathetic dystrophy syndrome after that, which is actually a horrible thing, through the treatment in Philadelphia at Villanova. And that really made me mad. All the work that she had done, all the work that we had helped her with, all of it went for naught after a while. But she would have been an outstanding runner. I think, you know, she was one of these that had, like, you know, Olympic capabilities. So anyway, it's a nasty bone, okay? Blood supply is bad. The next bone that we have down below the navicular is called the cuboid, okay? And it's really next to it. It's lateral. Navicular is medial, so here's medial, here's medial, here's lateral, here's lateral. This is lateral side over here, and this is the cuboid. It's a little bit more cube-shaped. Here's the cuboid right here. This is the cuboid in this picture right there. So the navicular was this, and the blue is the cuboid. Okay, now the cuboid's sort of like the keystone of the lateral arch. It has a couple other crazy little things about it. If you look at the bottom of the cuboid, this view right here is looking at the planar aspect. There's a groove right here on the bottom aspect of the cuboid, okay? And one of the tendons on the outside of the leg that attaches to the fibula runs underneath the arch, okay? Comes underneath the arch, and it actually goes across the bottom of the foot and attaches right here to the bottom of this first metatarsal. Really important tendon in regards to controlling, and muscle and tendon in regards to controlling my foot. But anyway, that's the cuboid. That's the cuboid right there. That's the cuboid. That's the cuboid. And it's harder to see because it's sort of covered up, but that's the cuboid right there. Then we have 3 small bones, and they're called cuneiforms. Cuneiforms, like our wedge, it means wedge. Like cuneiform writing, like in Oriental writing is cuneiform writing by a little wedge. And basically we have 3 cuneiforms. Those are the three cuneiforms right there. We can actually see a couple here. Here's the three cuneiforms right there. Let me do it in a different color. So here's the cuneiforms here. We can see two of the three there. We can see all three of them here, and we can see three of them here. They're called the cuneiforms. They could go by different names. The one that's by the big toe side would be either the first or the medial cuneiform. The one that's in the middle is called the second or intermediate cuneiform. That's this one right here. And the one that's beside that is called the third or lateral cuneiform. Okay. Now, interesting thing about these cuneiforms, okay, which you can see here a little bit. Okay, you can't see it too much on this one up here. I think you can actually see it a little bit here. Okay. Is that second cuneiform is shorter than the first and the third. So my first is sitting out here like this, okay? My third is sitting here, and my second is sitting down here, which creates a little bit of an upside down U-shaped joint. What's that called? It's called a mortise joint, like we talked about with the ankle. And that means that this second metatarsal, which is the longest, is stable. It's a very stable because it's now sitting down, and there's a bunch of little ligaments that connect the second metatarsal. I'll show you those in a different picture. It connects a second metatarsal. Second metatarsal doesn't move a whole lot. Third metatarsal moves more than the second. Fourth metatarsal moves more than the third. And fifth metatarsal flaps all over the place. First metatarsal moves up and down as well. But the second metatarsal is very, very stable. It doesn't move a whole lot. Okay, why? Because it sits in that mortise joint. And we can actually see that mortise joint here. If you look right here, see, there's that mortise joint right there. Okay. This is just looking at our articulated skeleton. This is a plastic skeleton, but here's the fibula right there. Okay, here's the tibia. There's that little notch we talked about on the tibia for the fibula. Here's the tailless. So this right here would be the tailless. You can see the tailless inside there, sitting inside the ankle mortise. Here's the calcaneus back here, which is that big heel bone. If you feel that big bone at the back of the heel, that's the calcaneus. That's this right here. The Achilles tendon attaches, comes down. We'll talk about this in the muscle. Attaches right here to this portion of the calcaneus posteriorly. Here's the cuboid right here, sort of cube shape. Here's where that little trough would be, that little tunnel that would be. Here's the lateral cuneiform. Here's the second cuneiform. You can barely see the medial cuneiform over there. And here's the navicular. And the navicular here is also very boat-shaped, like we talked about the navicular in the wrist. Boat shapes. Navicular means scaphoid. Sometimes they call this the scaphoid as well. This is just looking at a more articulated skeleton. You see the cuboid sitting over here. You see the navicular sitting right here. Okay. You see the cuneiforms. Third, second, first. Okay, and this also gives you a great view of that little mortise joint that we have at the base of the second, which makes this second metatarsal very stable. Okay, so that's an important factor to look at. This is just another view. Okay, here's the calcaneus. So if we're looking here, here's the calcaneus. Here's the tailless. I said this is called the body in this area, but this area right here that comes up the top is called the talar dome. I notice a lot of times I would get people with ankle injuries, and I always look at the talar dome because sometimes they get little compression fractures at the surface of the talar dome. Okay, here's the cuboid. Here's a cuboid right there. Right here is the navicular. Here's the third cuneiform. You can see the second cuneiform is sort of tucked down in there. You can't see the first. Okay. This is another view. Here's the calcaneus. Here's the tailless. Here's the navicular. Here's the cuboid, here's the third, here's the second, and basically here's the first cuneiform right there. And you can see that mortise right there. Same thing we saw before. So that's pretty obvious, pretty easy to see. Okay, so everybody should know if I put out the calcaneus, if you feel the bottom of the heel, okay, you're going to feel the bottom of the calcaneus. There's two little bumps. Those little bumps are called what? Sure, tubercles. So they have one on the medial side, one on the lateral side. Medial calcaneal tubercle, one on the lateral is lateral calcaneal tubercle. And if you feel that medial calcaneal tubercle and you feel along the arch, you feel from that point, you'll feel a band of tissue. And that's that when they talk about the plantar fascia, that's the plantar fascia. Now we talk about the metatarsals. So the metatarsals, meta means after, okay? And so the metatarsals are after the area of the tarsals. And again, here's the first cuneiform or medial cuneiform. Here's the second or intermediate, and here's the third or lateral. Here's part of the cuboid sitting right there. And again, here you see that mortise. Okay, a couple things I should mention about the metatarsals. Here's the first metatarsal. They name them first, second, third, fourth, and fifth metatarsal. Couple things that's important. They have a flat base to make articulation with either the cuboid here. Okay, cuboid makes articulations with the fourth and the fifth. So the fourth and fifth go to the cuboid, and the third goes to the third cuneiform, second goes to the second cuneiform, and first goes to the first cuneiform. Piece of cake, easy. Okay, so that's how we figure that out. So, and that's called the tarso-metatarsal joint. Why? Because these are tarsals and these are metatarsals. So tarso-metatarsal joint, that's what we have. This area in here would be the shaft or the diaphysis. Okay, we've seen that before. We've known all about that, the shaft or the diaphysis. And the distal portion, it's round. It's called the head. Go figure that. Okay, and this doesn't show it as round as they usually are. The head is usually a little bit more round, a little bit more rounded appearing. Okay, a little bit more round appearing. When you look at radiographs, they'll show you how most of them look a bit more round. And they're round, and the base of the proximal phalanx, which is this toe right, which is the first toe bone. So if I have a round bone on one side, what do I have on the other side? If this is convex, the other side should be concave, which it is. There's a little hollowed out area on the base of all the proximal phalanges, okay? And again, so what we find is the first, second, and third articulate with the respective cuneiforms. First metatarsal with the first cuneiform, second metatarsal with the second cuneiform, third metatarsal with the third, and the fourth and fifth both go to the cuboid. Okay, so let me just go ahead and erase that so you can look at that again. So if you have to go over that and see what we're talking about, you can see what we're talking about. Good, and that's what we have right there. So let's look at the metatarsals. Let's look at those on a skeletal structure. Here again would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you see how 4 and 5 articulate with the cuboid, and you see what the third is the third cuneiform, second cuneiform, first cuneiform, and then you see that little mortise joint again. If you look at the head's round, okay, and that's what we see at the head of the metatarsals. This is the shaft. One other area I just want to point out in regards to the metatarsals is this area right here. If you take off your shoe and you feel the lateral border of your foot, you'll feel a bump. That's what you're feeling. That's called the styloid process. We've seen styloids in multiple other bones. Styloid process is the fifth metatarsal. I don't know about you, but fracturing the fifth metatarsal is really not uncommon. I fractured my fifth metatarsal. I was playing ball. I was going out for a relay, stepped in a hole, twisted my ankle, and boom, I heard a crunch. I had a great game after that. I actually hit a home run later on in that game after that. So I had a really good offensive game, but I limped around for the whole game. Luckily, I didn't have to worry about a throw, with a home run, basically, because I just sort of limped around and it was fine. But anyway, that's called the styloid. I could talk for probably about 2 hours about the styloid process and the fifth metatarsal base fractures. If they're close to the styloid, they heal really well. The further I go away from the styloid, the worse they heal. And sometimes when I get out in this area, this is no man's land, and sometimes regardless of what you do, they don't heal at all. Okay, if you were a Ohio State football fan, Keith Byers was a player for Ohio State. He went to play at the Philadelphia Eagles, but when he was at Ohio State, he missed the entire year because he had a fifth metatarsal fracture, and it went on to a non-union. Okay, a union means it heals. Guess what a non-union means? It doesn't heal. He went to a non-union, ended up with surgery. They actually cleaned it out, put some bone chips in there, put a screw up there, still had some trouble. It took him a while to come back. He was drafted, played for a few years for I think the Eagles and maybe, I don't know, somebody else, but his career was probably cut short because of that. Okay, it's going to be a problem because they're a bear. Okay, and it depends upon, they have what are called zones down here, and the zones, as they get further towards the end of the bone, are getting more and more ominous in regards to where the chance of healing. Okay, mine, luckily, when I broke mine, when mine was back in here, and it healed without too much of a problem. Okay, I was in a cast for about 8 weeks, and it healed okay. but they're notorious for not healing very well. Okay, this is looking at the plantar aspect of the foot. So here's that fifth metatarsal. There's the styloid. So here's 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's that little groove that we were talking about in the area of the cuboid. Oh no, excuse me, that's not it. Here's the groove right here. I was too quick with my pen. My pen wasn't going the right direction. That's that groove, and the tendon comes actually attaches right here to the base of the first metatarsal. But you can see the mortise here. Here's, tucked in here. You can see where the second metatarsal is tucked in there. And if you ever heard, sometimes maybe you've heard of this name. Okay, I would never test you on that. Lisfranc. Sometimes they say I have a Lisfranc's injury, okay? And Lisfranc's injury is basically right between the base of the first metatarsal and the second metatarsal. They're held together by some ligament. With a Lisfranc's injury, what happens, they fracture that off, and the first metatarsal goes this way, and the second metatarsal goes that way. Nasty, nasty, nasty injury, okay? I've known people who were athletes who had Lisfranc's injury and were never able to play again, okay? Because it's hard to get everything back to the way it's supposed to. They can have continual pain. I remember I had a friend of mine was the trainer for the Gladiators, the arena football league, and every so often when I go, because I went to a lot of the games, he'd give me a call. I'd be in the stands. I'd be texting him on the bench and stuff like that. He'd have his phone, and I'd text him. And one day he asked if I could come down and take a look at a player after the game. So I did, and it turns out there was for something else, but the guy was actually, I looked at his scar, had a big scar along the medial side of his foot. I said, what happened here? And he said, I had an old Lisfranc's. I said, you're doing great then if you're able to play with the Lisfranc's. He said, yeah, he's very lucky. But it's a sprain right here. And what happens is the first metatarsal and second metatarsal will come together. First metatarsal goes this way, second metatarsal goes this way, and there's a big gap between the two. And it's a mess. They have to try to reapproximate and bring everything back. Let's get to and finish this up, and we'll talk about the phalanges. Phalanges are the digits, just like like we talked about the hand, the phalanges. And basically, we have in these. This is the one here would be the proximal, middle, and distal phalanx. We see that in the fifth, and 5, 4, 3, 2, and then the big toe. The word for the big toe is hallux, H-A-L-L-U-X, H-A-L-L-U-X. You should remember that, okay? We don't have a middle phalanx. We only have a proximal phalanx and a distal phalanx, okay? Proximal phalanx and a distal phalanx, okay? So that's what we have. So therefore, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 14 phalanges, just like we saw in the hand, okay? Sometimes this joint right here is actually fused between the distal phalanx and the middle phalanx of the fifth, but that's not a big deal. These are called interphalangeal joints, okay? Just like we talked about in the hand, this one here would be my proximal interphalangeal joint, P-I-P-J, and that's my distal interphalangeal joint, okay? So just like we saw in the hand, that's that. And this one here is just called the I-P-J, or interphalangeal joint. One thing I should have mentioned, and I forgot to mention it, is underneath the first metatarsal, there are two small bones. They look like this. They're two small sesamoids, and they're called holucal sesamoids. So if you see those radiographically, they're supposed to be there, okay? If someone says, oh, look at there's two little fractures there, they're not fractures. They're supposed to be there. And they look like two little ovoid things are sitting underneath the first metatarsal head, okay? And they're called the holucal sesamoids. They could also be a pain. My next door neighbor played for, was a wide receiver for the Browns. And now he's not living here. He moved out. He's living in Delaware now because he's retired. But basically, he had an injury to his one sesamoid, and they took it out. Sometimes I think they probably shouldn't have. I think that caused a bit of problem. But anyway, that's the sesamoids, holucal sesamoids. So if we look here, and you can actually see them right here. See them right there? See a little X-ray? Let me get my. See those two little circles? Those are supposed to be there, those sesamoids, and we see those holucal sesamoids right there as well. Okay, so radiographically, again, I see my first metatarsal, second, third, fourth, 5th. Here's the phalanges out here, metatarsals. We can see cuneiforms and stuff like that. Again, this is just like we talked about before. Here's the cuboid. Here's the navicular sitting right here. Cuboid is actually sitting up in here like this, and the cuneiform is going to be sitting right here. Metatarsals are going to be sitting right there. Calcaneus is sitting right here. This is called the anterior process of the calcaneus right there. It's a little beak, and sometimes that puppy gets fractured off too. I've seen a number of those. They get an ankle sprain, and the ankle sprain's not doing very well, and you look inside, and there's a fracture right there. Okay, this is just looking at a dorsal plantar view. What happens again, the view that you get is described by the direction of the beam. Dorsal plantar, or called a DP view, goes from the dorsum, the top, to the bottom. So they'd have the film here, the leg would be here, the foot would be sitting like that. That's a bad foot, okay? Sitting like that, and the x-ray view comes this way, okay? And it's called a dorsal plantar view, and that's what this is right here. And pretty much says everything we need to see. We see the interphalangeal joints, we see the proximal and distal interphalangeal joints, we see the proximal phalanges, middle phalanges, distal phalanges, metatarsal phalangeal joint, and there's the sesamoid. See it says sesamoid bones? You see one right there, see one right there. Piece of cake. First, second, third, fourth, and fifth metatarsals. Here's the first cuneiform, second cuneiform, and third. Why can't I see those easily? Because they're overlapped at superimposition. Here's the cuboid. Here's the navicular. Here's the head of the tailless. Here's the calcaneus peeking out from underneath the tailless. You can see the medial malleolus here. Medial malleolus. Here's the lateral malleolus sitting over here. Okay, and that's what we see with that. Here's another view. There's the sesamoids. See the sesamoids? See how they sit underneath there? And just shows the same thing. Here's the calcaneus. Here's the tailless. Here's the navicular, like we talked about. Cuboid sort of sits down here. That's part of the cuboid sitting underneath. You can barely see it. Why? It's on the other side of the foot, and all the cuneiforms are over the top of it. Okay. Here's the metatarsals. Here's the phalanges out here. Okay. This thing is interesting too. It's called the sinus tarsi. It's a gap that goes all the way from medial to lateral. It's like a tunnel or a canal. It's not really empty. It's filled with ligament, but it holds the tailless and the calcaneus together. Okay, it's called the interosseous talocalcaneal ligament that sits inside there. But what happens is radiographically, when you look at it, it looks like a hole. Okay, I've done a number of injections in there when people have problems inside the subtalar joint, that's the joint between, which the subtalar joints between the tailless and the calcaneus. This is just looking at the calcaneus a little bit more. Okay, so here's the calcaneus. This is the medial side over here. Here's the lateral side over here. There's a little shelf of bones called the sustentaculum tali, which is right here, right there. Sustentaculum tali creates a little overlap, and a couple tendons fit right underneath there. The tibialis posterior and the flexor ilicis longus and flexor digitorum longus tendons go underneath there. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, here's part of that subtalar joint we see right there. A couple things about arches, and arches, everyone wants to blame the arches for everything, and yeah, I think sometimes structure makes a difference, but I think the arches are probably more they're a reflection of motions that occur in the foot because of certain structural abnormalities. Okay, everybody says, oh, I have fallen arches. Well, the arches are the recipient. It's something else that's causing that to happen, okay? So we have what's called a medial longitudinal arch, okay? And that's this area right here, medial longitudinal arch. And the keystone, okay, we talk about a keystone. This is called the keystone. If you look at an archway here, keystone is this stone right here. It's sort of what holds it up. In other words, there's nothing, this sort of locks this column. So the keystone locks this column in with this column, okay? Well, what happens is actually the keystone in here is not the tailless. That's wrong. The keystone is the navicular. We talked about before how that navicular gets jammed between the tailless and the cuneiforms, and that sometimes causes that navicular stress fracture. Okay, so that's what we have there. So this is my medial longitudinal arch. There's a little bit one on the lateral side, but it's not nearly as prominent as on the medial side. Okay, there's a transverse arch from right to left, but I don't really believe a whole lot in that myself. Okay, and that would be between all the navicular, the cuneiforms, the basis of all 5 metatarsals. Okay, but that's just looking at the arches, and we could spend probably a week just talking about arch function and arch structure, but we don't have time for that. So anyway, that's a little bit about arches. So what did we talk about today? Well, we finished up with the rest of the lower extremity. We finished talking about the ankle joint itself and that mortise structure. That's a word I think you should remember, mortise. Okay, mortise. Where do you see a mortise besides in anatomically? If someone is building a wall, you wouldn't put a brick on top of another brick on top of another brick on top of another brick. It's not very stable. So what do? You stagger them. You have a bricks here like here, bricks here like that, bricks here like that. You take another brick, goes on here, brick goes on here like this, and you have another brick and the brick goes on here. What that does is that creates a mortise that makes that joint very stable, okay? And that's why that ankle joint is very stable, because it's a mortise joint, okay? We talked about that. We talked about the tarsals, the tailless, the calcaneus, the cuboid, and the cuneiforms, 1, 2, 3, or medial, intermediate, and lateral cuneiforms. Talked about 5 metatarsals and the basis behind that. One thing I should mention about the metatarsals too, I mentioned the head is round, but if I looked at down the end of them, they actually have a little trough at the end. They look like this at the very end, okay? And this little trough is for the tendon that actually brings the toes down, that flexes the toes. It runs into that little trough through the head of the metatarsal, but it's beyond what we really need to know about. We talked about the phalanges, okay? So that sort of ties up everything in the lower extremity. Hopefully this has all made sense to you. Again, as always, if you have any questions, make sure you ask and let me know. And if not, for now, at least, again, be safe and be healthy, and we'll talk to you